All right, well, welcome back to the Lions Den Academy as we continue our weekly interview on the spiritual gifts. And today we're going to be exploring the spiritual gift of leadership with my brother Jasen Coldiron.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, welcome to the channel. So as we always do, we're kind of just diving into three main questions here. And the first one is, tell us about your testimony of coming to Christ and how after coming to Christ, you found this gift of leadership kind of bubbling up inside you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's talk about the coming to Christ. I kind of grew up with a mom who demonstrates the power of a praying parent. And so I would say that early on, she raised me in a godly home. It was a broken home, just her and I for a long time, in a church environment, in a healthy church environment. She was just a kid as well. She was young when she had me. And like a typical teenager, about high school, I decided I was going to live with my dad, and I decided that whole church thing just wasn't for me anymore. And it was a jarring realization to come back into a relationship with Jesus. So I get married, we find out we're having a baby, and something just kind of pulled at that inner just deepest part of me saying, I don't like the guy I am right now. Nor do I want a son to grow up under the guy that I am right now. And so, you could probably appreciate this. I kind of flipped everything upside down at the same time. So I was a guy, I quit smoking cigarettes. I enrolled in college, went back to my childhood church. It kind of all in the same, and joined a gym. You can appreciate that. So I was gonna get back to this place where I could be what I thought the model for a good dad would be. And Jesus was at the very center of that. And so I can tell you that as a kid growing up, my mom didn't believe I should be baptized until I could fully understand the faith as my own. And so I got baptized at 20 years old in a neighborhood pool from that small rural church. And I'd love to tell you I came out of the water and everything changed. But what I will tell you changed is my dedication to Jesus changed. That was the remarkable difference in the way I decided to pursue him. Not perfectly, but just from this place of I just want to know him more. And I would tell you that idea of leadership, that gift of leadership, I don't know the academic knowledge, so forgive me for my lack of theology here, but I think that gifting was given to me at a young age, and I just used it improperly. And so the difference in pre-Christ and post-Christ, this decision to follow him more closely, was the way that I used the gift. And so I would tell you that I think that the gifting was present for a long time, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute, but the way I chose to use it on the flip side of dedicating my life to Jesus changed. And so no more would it be about my personal gain, and now it should be more about building of the kingdom. And those are very different approaches to using the same gift, if that makes sense. So that answer the trajectory of just kind of the
for sure
church kid, went rogue, came back, and had some of these things that I didn't manage very well. And the difference in following Jesus was trying to take those things that he's given me and focus them for building his kingdom instead of my own, which is hard for me. I'm an achiever. I like to build my own things.
Yeah, for sure. And so now you are leading the executive protection part of our safety team at our church. In addition to that, you've worked your way from being, I believe you call it a service tech.
That's right.
In a gas industry to now being a CEO. So definitely have seen God really, shine brightly and through you. So do you want to take people through really like that transition of going to service tech to now big dog CEO?
Yeah. So let me tell you why I think this gifting was a gifting. And so I can't take any credit for it. I find myself as what I'll call the hesitant leader. And so it shows up in things where you're in a group conversation and we found the problem. And it seems so clear to me on how to solve the problem. And I'm looking around asking, why isn't anyone like stepping in to say they'll like I understand it, let's go. Not from an arrogant standpoint. I'm kind of like, I don't want to be the guy to kind of lead this thing. But that is denying the gift. So I think the gift that God gave me that I can take zero credit for is the ability that discernment or that ability to see the things that can take us from A to B. And then not using them for his glory is really a form of pride. As crazy as that sounds, because pride would tell you that it's something that puffs you up, If I were to tell you that me leading it from A to B, the reason I'm not doing it is because I'm the only one that can. There's a lot of pride wrapped in the, even saying no.
Well, sorry for the scene change here. We had to change rooms due to a scheduling error. However, we're going to kick right back up where we were starting. And so we were talking about Jason's transition from service tech on a gas line company to now a CEO, and how you were a hesitant leader. So I'll let you pick that back up.
Yeah, thanks for demonstrating the flexibility required to be in leadership. We kind of pick up in port and go to what's next.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were talking about the idea of using the gifting for our own personal glory versus the God's kingdom, and I was leaning into that concept of reluctant leader just based on the fact that at a young age I could see kind of the difference, the line between A and B, and trying to figure out why someone else isn't just stepping into it. And I would love to tell you that I got it right all the time, but let's rewind back to the youth. A lot of times I was a little overly. Let's say my pride flared up and I would tell everybody about the line from A to B and kind of even like tout that. It's kind of like Joseph telling the story about the prophetic vision that he had and then going and telling his brothers. Like the content was real, but it was more focused on his own glory, and it really is just really destructive. And I had to learn some of those lessons the hard way. I've always been a competitor. I've always been an achiever. Any of the things that you can put in front of me, I want to succeed. And I used that really, really poorly in the beginning, and it burned relationships, and it got me a lot of things. I can hang a lot of stuff on the wall, but those things are pretty hollow. And so in this season of post devotional life to Jesus, I'm just learning. I'm still learning, just to be candid. I'm still learning what it looks like to serve and to lead like Jesus did with a servant's heart. And James, I would love to tell you again that I've got this perfect equation that says A equals B. I just don't have that yet. What I do know is that God gave me the gift of leadership. I've done the work to say, what do others see in me? What does my experience demonstrate? And what has God shown me through his word? Those things all align up into this leadership gift. And now I'm really just trying to shrug off the feeling of arrogance saying that God gave me the gifting. God gave me the gifting so that it can be used in his kingdom, not so that it could make me rich and famous. And so it's a really hard battle for me to say, be an achiever and also be a servant leader. And I'm still learning how to kind of mix those things together. I will tell you that I'm starting to hold the wins differently. And so when you start thinking about the things, like most people say, service technician to CEO and CEO's the win, it's really not. The wins for me have been seeing people's careers develop, seeing some folks on my team grow into their next level of leadership, being a component of them viewing the world a little bit differently. Some of the things I hold in highest regard are one of the young ladies that was a receptionist in our office, and I engaged with her in this individual development plan. And as she left our company, for all good reasons, left healthily, she was a senior project manager. From receptionist to senior project manager. She put in the hard work and the skills and the determination and everything else, but I saw the thing in her and called her to it, and she stepped in, and so that's one of my greatest victories now. It's not I can tell you about the profit and loss statements, I can tell you about the huge budgets I've managed and all those things. They're just not as important. And right behind that is a guy that I spent 3 years really trying to pour into him about who Jesus is and what Jesus means. And to see that guy give his life to Christ a year and a half ago, I just got the opportunity to tell him last week how important that is to me. Like that is a marker of success. If I can build a trophy shelf, I want those things on there. I want the people whose careers have been impacted. I want the lives that have been changed and that are now focused in making bigger impacts. Because I'll tell you the little known secret. The leaders aren't necessarily the best producers. And so, the old adage was those who can do and those who can't teach. It's kind of the same on the leadership side. I'm not the subject matter expert at anything. I'm more of a generalist. And so the very few giftings God gave me, one of those things is leadership and just being able to rally a team towards a common goal and to accurately kind of diagnose where we are and where we want to get to. It's really, really not rocket science. I'm not the best. There are people far better, accountants, engineers, technicians. There are people that can run circles around me in just about every discipline. And so having enough humility to say, okay, God, you created me to serve, not to achieve, it's really been transformational in this last few years. So the older I get, the more I realize what I don't know, and the more comfortable I'm trying to get with, hey God, this is how you created me, and so let me lend my strengths to how you're building your kingdom.
Right on.
Yeah.
And do you want to? I know you said it's not really what you view as a win right now, but do you want to kind of just briefly share your story?
Yeah. So I do think being faithful with what God gives you is part of the equation. And so I've been very fortunate in my career on the professional side to be engaged with companies that valued education, that valued training. And so as a service technician, Citizens Energy Group, shameless plug, I still love that entire company, that leadership team, that CEO, still very impactful in my life even to this day. But their model was to invest in leaders, and so I mean, they encouraged me to go back to finish my college education. Not only did they encourage it, they paid for it based on a grading scale, and so if I performed, they paid hand in hand with that. And so if you're out there as a leader and you want to know how to move your people along as well, they gave me opportunities. And so as I completed my undergrad degree and my MBA, they opened up new roles for me and took a risk on me, and gave me increasing levels of leadership. I went from a service technician in a bargaining unit, so a union environment, to the frontline supervisor for those people, for that same group, outside of the union. So I had to learn how to cross the boundary and get into a place to like provide some instruction. Then they moved me into a place, a leadership role that oversaw a couple manufacturing plants. So we had this stuff called liquid natural gas. It's super awesome. It's a refrigeration cycle that really I love. That's the engineer side of me. It's super cool gas. So I now all of a sudden have a staff of 20. Hey, you want to talk about making mistakes? Dude, I made plenty there. The worst one, we're in this staff meeting and I'm trying to roll out this piece of strategy and I'm just confident that it's going to go great. And a tenured employee just kept digging his heels in and he kept kind of pushing back in the conversation, which now is super healthy for me. I looked at this guy and this is shameful. I looked at this guy and I said, you and I will talk about this offline directly after this. And he said something back and I said, no, that's not an option. And it was the most terrible demonstration of leadership ever. Now, God in his faithfulness, the conversation right after that turned into a super fruitful one. And I got to talk to him about who I am and who he is and apologize. Another thing for your toolkit is apologize. Apologize all the time, especially when you get it wrong. So I'm doing these manufacturing roles. My last role at Citizens was corporate development. So mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, and new business. And I loved all pieces of those. And that's where I started getting to flex some of the academic things I had learned, some of the experience I had blended, and kind of learned a little bit more about the work environment I was looking for. That part moves really, really fast versus the typical utility moves a little different pace. It's more methodical and predictable, and I'm not very good at that level of work. And so that's kind of what catapulted me out of Citizens and into the couple places I'm at now. The CEO role, it's not as glamorous as people think. There's lots of nights that I'm thinking through how to do right by the individual employee and the organization, and what happens when those don't line up. And so, you have to do what's best for the overall health of the company while still treating people with dignity and respect. And sometimes one decision makes it a really bad option for the other person. And so there's this tension that you live in. It's like, hey, how do I do what's best for the person and what's best for the company? And when those things align, it's perfect. I mean, it's super fantastic. You can lay out the right plan, the right strategy. Everyone gets the rewards, and we're all marching the same direction. But history tells me that doesn't happen even 75% of the time. And so a lot of times you're trying to make this decision based on personal relationships you have, other things that you've committed to. It's really tough. And so if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, if you don't have the undergirding of the Word of God and leaning into some men's groups and people that can sharpen you, it's pretty lonely. And you can make some bad decisions because we're prideful creatures, and so we may float back to what is best for us. So in that equation, you didn't even hear me talking about what's best for me. What's the incentive for me? And so this journey to land the plane on the question, I had some really good employers that had some good leaders, that had some good policies, procedures, and structures in place. And I'm doing my best to recreate lots of those things in the environments where I'm leading now. The pathway from service technician to CEO, I never had the career ambition to be a CEO. I just didn't. Um, I require a certain level of interaction in the strategy for what we're trying to do. I ask a lot of questions. I'm a tough guy to manage. So people that manage me are usually pulling their hair out. They usually have a hairline about like yours. And so a lot of times I'm upfront about that. I really know I'm tough to manage because I will ask a lot of questions. I want to understand how to take something apart. The difference is it's so that I can take it back apart, put it back together, and lead a team through the same thing. I don't want to ask people to do something that I don't understand or that I'm not capable of doing. I want to make sure that everybody kind of gets that whole, start with a why from Simon Sinek. There's policies and procedures, but we've got to get everybody on the playing field for the why. Why is it important? What's the mission? When we run up against a hill and you got your 50-pound pack on and we got to climb 80 degrees up, there's more than just here's what we're doing. There's got to be a why behind it, right? What's the rally call? How do we get up that hill?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Long way from service technician to CEO. The things I controlled were attitude and effort. The other things were God's opportunities, these companies being willing to invest in me, and just some open dialogue. I've been blessed with some really good leaders that have led me as well. And I want to be the same.
Right on. Yeah, it definitely sounds a bit God ordained as well, as far as the doors opening. I mean, you mentioned Joseph earlier. I mean, kind of almost similar story as well, other than being sold into slavery.
Yeah. I'm glad that. Although I did work at a penitentiary for 5 years out of high school, so there is a similar thread there that I did experience prison from the employment side.
But just how constantly the doors kept on being made open, or kept on advancing higher and higher and higher.
Yeah.
So,
I think if your desire is to be a leader of any level, don't be afraid to say I got it wrong. Don't be afraid to say I'm sorry. And don't be afraid to ask for a better idea than yours. Mm-hmm. And if you can rally a team to those things, I go on a lot of apology tours. I get it wrong, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of times where I'm walking around saying, "Hey, you were right, and I was wrong." You got to have some humility, or it'll be pushed back into.
Yeah, and I've heard from Jocko, his podcast, how he'll say that a lot of times people think that will harm their reputation as a leader, but it actually does nothing but bolster it up because people are able to see that you make mistakes.
That's right.
And
that's right. So, I mean, one of the guys I listen to is Craig Groeschel. He has a great leadership podcast. Mm-hmm. His tagline is, people would rather follow a leader who's always real than one who's always right. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of, you get it wrong, own it. I think we have this misconception that, especially as young leaders coming in, we're supposed to have all the answers. Dude, I rarely have all the answers. I rarely have half the answers. You got to know where to get them. You got to know the right people to get into the room, the right conversation to have, and say you got it wrong. Mm-hmm. Say, hey, will you forgive me? I've said those words. Yeah. Hey, I lost my temper in a meeting. You didn't deserve that. We should have stayed about the problem and not about the character. I need to ask you for forgiveness. And I've said that to an executive team, to the guy I singled out. I looked across the table and said, that was unfair. That brushed on hitting your character. I shouldn't have said it. I'm going to ask you publicly in front of these guys if you'll forgive me. And it made him real nervous. You're using words that he's not real comfortable with. This is a CFO. He's kind of like, I said, no, it's important to me that we have the delineation between the thing that happened and what your character is. Because we're not here to assassinate characters. We're here to deal with issues.
Yeah. And so I guess now we'll go to the second main question, which is, can you describe a time or several times, if several come up, where using this gift of leadership has not only either been a blessing to others, or maybe it's just personally impacted you in some strong way?
Yeah, I think, like I said a little bit earlier, I think in getting to see other people's development, that's when it strikes me the most. That's that real sweet spot of, hey, God, you gave me the opportunity, you gave me the gifting, and I actually did use it for your kingdom, and look at the result. It was a life impact change. It was people changing. My number one reflection of that is the couple times I've moved companies, when I get 15 phone calls from people that worked with me before and said, I don't really know what you're doing over there, but I'd like to join. That's not I'm under no preconceived idea that that's because I'm some fantastic leader. But that's a reflection of people want to be on the train. And so that because there's been some fair treatment, they've had some career progression, they've had empowerment, they've had these things. That's like the gold star for me is people that call and say, hey, I don't know what that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who Frigi is. I don't even know how to pronounce the word. But is there a seat over there? And that legitimately happened. I've been at Frigi now a little over 5 years. That first 6 months, man, I had 20 people that didn't even know who the company was. Mm-hmm. And please hear my heart. It's not because I need the pride and inflation of my ego. It's because they saw their own careers growing when I was part of their conversation, and so they want that again. Mm. And so the markers are different, right? I mean, again, the world would tell you there's a level of P&L management, and I've had some, James, that is as high as $400 million, and some that's as low as thousands of dollars, and so in every gradient in between. I don't really care about that. I've had organizations where we had 2,000 employees and where we had 12. I don't really care about that. Those are the things that the world will tell you is important. What's your P&L responsibility? How many direct reports have you had? List out the deals you've done. And James, I can tell you there's lots of those. I've been fortunate enough to have lots of those deals done, high financial transactions, all that stuff. It was fun. It was great. But if it didn't change lives, it doesn't go on the shelf. Mm-hmm. The shelf items are the guy that gave his life to Jesus, the young lady that transitioned her career, the HR manager right now that I just see so much potential in, and I can't wait to see what she does next. The operations director who has so much upside potential once he stops fighting for personal glory. Like those things, those are the things that I'm going to put on the shelf. Mm. And I know that they have eternal impact. And so when we get to heaven, those are the things that I want to be. I want Jesus to tell me, well done, good and faithful servant, because of those are the things that mattered. Right. He doesn't care about the balance sheet or the income statement or how many degrees I have or the financial acumen. He doesn't really care about that unless I leverage those to further his kingdom. And so the trophy shelf is about people for me.
Right on. As it should be.
Yeah.
So last question then. So for those that are feeling like this is a calling on their lives, and I feel like this is one that just like serving, everyone, because even if you don't have people directly reporting to you, you lead yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like there's definitely tips and takeaways that you can provide really any and everyone that's watching this right now. So what would your recommendations be for someone to grow into leadership, into this gift? Personal life steps, spiritual rhythms, books, podcasts, anything like that.
So let's start with like my favorite quote. Martin Luther King Jr. said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And so that he coined it, he penned it, and it's totally correct. So to lean into that leadership thing, I like to ask why. So if you're being called into leadership, called can be kind of just a catchphrase. Mm-hmm. And so I would let's examine why do you feel like you're being called into it? There's this balance between it's what ignites your passion. It's what others tell you about yourself. It's what your experience shows. So there's some markers that start to line up to say this leadership thing exists. Mm-hmm. And so examine the why. I had this very direct conversation with a guy who was mad at me for not placing him into a service manager role. So I'm going to explain what's going on. And just recently, I had promoted him into a manager role that really leans into his strengths, his field expertise, his ability to coach. Like, it's the perfect fit for him. So I asked him, I said, why do you want the service manager role? I want to hear more about the why. Mm-hmm. And his response to me is because it's the next step in my career. And I said, that's the wrong reason to get into leadership. That's the wrong reason. Yeah. So again, we're back to some of the things I did poorly in my past. I'm not looking for a way to climb the ladder. I'm asking if I'm even supposed to be on the ladder. And so the why, like if you feel called, examine those things. Ask some people that really know you. Look at the work experience or the other experience that you've had, personal experience. Read God's word and then ask the why. Because leadership is not, it's a heavy mantle. Mm-hmm. And biblically, you're carrying more responsibility. So you're going to be held accountable for it. Mm-hmm. So in the areas that you lead, husbands lead your wives, all these things, we're going to be accountable for that. So it's not a light load to carry. So examine the why. Once you get to the place where you feel like, yes, God, I've done the litmus test. I've kind of checked these boxes and I feel like you're calling me here. Then it's time to start the opportunities. And so, look for opportunities to lead internally. If you need to lead by a business card, you don't need to lead. And so if you're waiting for someone to grant you a title before you start leaning in and asking questions and doing servant leadership type stuff, I don't think you're qualified for leadership. And I apologize if that's too brash, but if you're waiting for the business card to give you authority, that is the power of coercion, not the power of influence. And so what we're trying to do is sharpen that power of influence. How do we rally the crowd and move the crowd? Not because my org chart tells you got to listen to me, but because I've given you a compelling vision and a compelling why, and you want to go with me. Not because I can tell you what to do, right?
Yeah.
General MacArthur or somebody said I never had to use my title when I was giving out commands. We should not have to use our title for giving out commands. So don't wait. Don't wait. For anybody that says they're waiting to get promoted for the leadership, practice now.
Yeah. That reminds me of, from a different perspective, Ryan Billmet talking about when people were saying, hey, I feel like I'm being called into ministry. Okay, well, tell me about your ministry right now.
That's right.
I don't have one. Okay, well.
Yeah. It's the parable of the talents, right? So like those that were given 1 talent, 2 talents, 3 talents. If you're being called into leadership, practice it. Practice it. Practice it. You give a couple examples. Practice it in your home. Practice it in your friend group. Practice it. Just practice it. Now, there are some practical tools and lots of things, and I am an eager reader and digester, and so I'll tell you a couple ideas. Books and podcasts. I listen to lots of podcasts, but there are really a couple good ones by Craig Groeschel and Andy Stanley that both produce a monthly leadership podcast. Really strong tools. Groeschel will even publish a handout that goes with it. So if you're just wanting to lead a group, I did this for 2 years. I took my executive team, started off as voluntary, said, hey, I'm trying to become a better leader. Would you join me in this conversation? And so we're going to listen to a podcast once a month. It's Craig Groeschel's podcast. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions. This is not going to be a ton of to-dos and lots of prep work. Tell me what stood out to you and how it's going to impact your leadership. And let's have a roundtable discussion. And so Friday mornings at 7 o'clock, we'd get together, start off with 4 people, turned into 12. And we would just have that conversation. Let's just talk about, so Groeschel publishes a study guide. There's some content out there that you can start practicing. I said it's totally voluntary. You don't get brownie points if you show up. You don't get negatives if you don't show up. Join me in being a better leader. So there's some podcasts I read. Anything Lencioni writes, I usually read it. So Patrick Lencioni writes tons of good books. His podcast is hard for me to listen to. It's called At the Table. Content is fantastic. It's just this weird thing. His voice kind of throws me off. His books are amazing. I am going to go see him in person. He's coming to an event. At the Table is a good podcast. There's lots of just practical applications. Again, podcast, books. What else? I guess that's really it.
Okay. Listen,
stay hungry, ask lots of questions, and find ways to practice before your quote unquote business card tells you you're a leader.
Yeah, better to make the mistakes when it's not even on your title too. Right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly. Learn how to apologize early. Yeah. It's really good. Yeah. Leadership is an interesting thing, man, and I love everything about it. The one blind spot for me typically is don't take it for granted that the gifting you have is the same as the person next to you has. And so a lot of times in early frustration, I'd be like, why aren't they just doing X? It's so clear that X is the right thing. And actually my wife corrected me. She said, hey, that's something that comes easy for you because God gave you the gifting. So it's not fair for you to expect the same thing out of other people. And so just having a kind of grounded perspective of it's God's gift. He gave it to me. How am I going to steward it well? And then how am I going to practice it? Sharpen it. It's a muscle. Flex it. Right. Don't just sit on the gifting and let it wither. Don't use it for your own glory. Don't let it wither. Plug it in.
Right on. Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining us here. I know that it's tons of great nuggets that you just shared. So hopefully for you future leaders out there, and even those that aren't in a necessarily leadership role or feeling like that's really what you're being called or aspired to, there's definitely takeaways here from Jasen that you can definitely apply to your life and definitely grow. So for those of you that would like to continue here, we do have these weekly interviews coming out each Saturday at noon until we get through all of these spiritual gifts. So make sure you subscribe, get notified on that if you don't want to miss it. So until next video.
Wait, I got one more. I forgot. Yeah. One more. So one more takeaway. This is what when that blank look hits about 3 minutes ago, this is what I was trying to grasp. One simple tool that I found super effective, and you can replicate this one. Most of the stuff I shared with you is more descriptive. It wasn't prescriptive. This one you can take tangibly and go apply. Find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in your life or in your sphere of influence that are 5 or 10 years ahead of you in whatever you're trying to be. Better husband, better wife, better leader, better whatever. And ask them if you can buy them coffee once a quarter. And when you show up to buy them coffee once a quarter, don't have an agenda. Just ask them to explain to you some problems that they're solving and to talk through their leadership style. You can then take that and start molding your own leadership profile. I've been super fortunate that these 10 or 15 men have spoken wisdom in my life and were willing to let me buy them a cup of coffee once a quarter and show up with your notebook and just take notes. It's so fantastic to gather that wisdom from those folks that are just 5 or 10 years ahead of where you're trying to get to. So I don't want to leave without forgetting for sharing
Appreciate it. Yeah.
That quarterly rotation is like foundational in where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and you get a bunch of good coffee and
That's right.
Too.
That's right.
Win-win.
Win-win.
All right. So until next video, God bless and keep you.